Okay, so shall we begin, João?
Yes, we should begin. So firstly, I would like to thank all the attendees, everyone who stopped their days to be here with us. Quickly introducing Fernando and I, for those who don't know us yet. Fernando and I are the organizers and editors of the book 20 in 2020. And I think we don't need more to speak about Gerardo Mosquera, who's a legendary art critic, curator, historian, who we have the pleasure to welcome here today. I would like also to take this opportunity to health professionals who have been in the front line for nearly a year now. We hope vaccine campaigns evolve well, and soon we have a better COVID scenario all over the globe. Also, I would like to thank very much the artists and curators who have participated in the book. We have a very mixed and interesting list. Thank you deeply and truly everyone that participated. Also just explaining for those who don't know us yet, Art Consulting Tool is an art advisory and bureau projects based in Sao Paulo. And we work with many artists, curators, and collectors in different endeavors. The link for the book, for you to acquire the book, will be sent in the chat of the webinar and by email after the talk. And you can send your questions once the talk is over. We will reply them. You can send them in Portuguese, in Spanish, or in English, whatever. So, Gerardo, I would like to start asking you a question that is related to the opening essay you wrote for the book, which is centered in Marta Traba. I wonder if you can please explain us who was Marta Traba, what is her contribution to Latin American art, and if after 50 years, is it the end of an art of resistance, a theory she has endorsed?
Well, hello. First of all, I would like to thank Fernando Ticoulat and João Paulo Siqueira Lopes for this invitation, for being here with you, and also for writing the introduction to this beautiful book that they put together, 20 in 2020. Well, we could say that the book is a result of Marta Traba's invention of Latin American art. Latin American art was invented by a brilliant woman, this Argentinian Colombian art historian and critic, who was the first back in the 1960s and 70s to build an all-encompassing approach to address the art that was produced in the region. And this perspective was also backed by the Cuban-American curator Jose Gomez Sicre. Before them, what prevailed were individual approaches to each artist, sometimes based on their nationalities, and the critics and art historians usually also approach movements such as Mexican muralism, etc. So Traba was the first critic to work with a comprehensive knowledge of what was happening in the region's art. And by employing that knowledge, she constructed a canonical vision, and she was determined to uphold for upholding a sphere and an identity of Latin American art. This was crucial because it gave legitimacy to the specific character of a Latin American art, in opposition to viewing it as nothing more than a derivative art from Europe and the United States, which was the approach, the prevailing approach. So this was a very important outcome that we should credit to Marta Traba. Although she fought against folkloric or sociological art, in her defense of the region's artistic originality, so that she was trying to support that, vis-a-vis saying that, well, there was not such a thing like a Latin American art because it was mainly a derivative. But for doing that, she highlighted the creative expressions of context and cultural tradition in a reductionist way. She was unable to open up to a general interpretation of Latin American art in all its intricate complexity. She proclaimed an exclusionary canon in favor of a militancy of identity, what she called an art of resistance, while also denouncing artists who, in her view, had magnetically surrendered, that was the word she used, surrender, to the mainstream, or who were introducing what she also dubbed as an aesthetics of deterioration, mainly through pop conceptualism and performance art. It's really telling about this that she completely refused to legitimize Brazilian art. So all these extraordinary and very important processes that were taking place in Brazil at the time, so neo-concretism and all its rich derivations, she totally, put that to the side. And she thought that it was mimetic or it was an art of deterioration, and was not an art that was resisting, the colonial imposition of certain artistic values and canons. So she tried to support artists who were in a way representing a different particular contexts, histories, traditions, cultural elements. And so I think that I wrote that in the introduction to the book, that she will most probably wouldn't like the book at all, because she was not right. History proved that actually processes like the ones that were taking place in Brazil were the ones which prevailed in a increasingly globalized world. So I think that this idea of an art of resistance was, I don't want also to criticize it temporarily. So we have to place it in its time, which was a time, you know, the 60s, the 70s, in which, following the impact of the Cuban Revolution, there was a time of confrontation. There were guerrillas all over Latin America. There were military regimes. And so it was a very convulsed time in which to talk about an art of resistance mean something very different than the situation in which art is being produced in the continent nowadays. I think that now art has followed a different paradigm, and in which the resistance is not manifested by representing a difference from a different context, a different position, but actually by constructing the international from the context. So in this case, the agency is not put like in the way of proclaiming the difference, but actually to infiltrating the difference in the construction of an international art language.
Right. Yeah, I think we can go to the second. Keeps a bit the direction of this first question. So after reading a few texts of yours, I could perceive this notion of us Latin Americans suffer from a problem of self. We struggle to accept who we are in our diversity and contradiction. We often consider ourselves Europeans or Indians and who have nothing to do with the Occident. We sort of lose ourselves between these two extremes. So I would like you to explain a bit better what is today's Latin American identity and identity in art, and what does 2020 adds to this discussion.
Latin America has suffered an neurosis of identity, which is a result of its very diverse and complex ethnogenesis. Back in 1979, the Brazilian critic Frederico Moraes linked our identity obsession with colonialism. And he proposed, I will quote, a plural, diverse, and multifaceted, unquote, idea of the continent, which was a product of its multiplicity of origin. Nevertheless, this preoccupation, this obsession with identity has continued until very recent times. I feel that now we are situating ourselves more within the fragment, juxtaposition, and collage, accepting our diversity as well as our contradictions. And this is a result also of several processes and also of the impact that all what we call postmodern thinking, postmodern philosophy, has opened new doors to understand Latin American culture and to think on it, not trying to build like all encompassing notions as have been the Baroque or mestizaje, but try, why not, to think on ourselves as a diverse, sometimes disconnected and full of contradictions. So it's a more realistic acceptance of the way we are. Uh, and as part of this process also, Latin American art is now being valued more as an art without surnames. So instead of demanding that it declares its identity, so what was more usual in the 1980s, where the Latin American art was asked to be another to the West, so, to Western culture. So it was the perfect other because it was different, but at the same time it was not so different. So there was this tendency to buy exoticism. But now something different is happening to my view. Instead of demanding that the Latin American art declares its identity, art from this region is now being recognized more and more as a participant in a general practice that does not by necessity show its context, and that on occasions refers to art itself. As we could see in all the tradition of the Latin American abstract art, which is more a reflection on art and its possibilities than is not looking to a particular context. So artists from Latin America have begun increasingly to exhibit, publish, and exercise influence outside of ghettoized circuits. So if you look at in 2020, what you will see is a tremendous diversity of the art that has been included there, which is actually a picture, a summary of what's happening in today's art in Latin America. And then you will also see that these artists who are there, they are not, acting from an abstract ground. The context is very present in their work, but it's not represented. It's a context in action, not in representation. So the artist's experiences, contexts, cultures are not proclaimed, but are just are the base over which the art is constructed. So I think it's a different direction in what was expected on Latin American art and how we ourselves, we Latin American art, cultural critics and artists and writers, we were, looking at to us under those frames. But now the situation has changed. I think that for good, and this book is one more example of that.
Exactly, yes. was one of our aims to do this book. So on that note, I would like to ask Fernando a bit more about the curatorial exercise and the call for mondialité that he mentions in his text.
Okay, thank you, João. Thank you, Gerardo, for being here, and the audience too. Before we begin, actually, if anyone wants to make a question in Portuguese, English, or Spanish, feel free to use the chat tool you have here, and we'll try to get to them as fast as possible. As for the curatorial exercise of this book, so it's a selection of 20 artists, which everyone that participated in the book somehow believes are artists that are important for the artistic landscape of this decade to come. The decade begins in the year 1, so this is the first month of the 20th decade of the century. And this book comes within a larger research project that we are doing here at Art Consulting 2 about Latin America arts. And there is this idea that being Brazilian, Brazil is kind of an island within Latin America. I'm curious to know what Gerardo thinks about this comment. But I think it's quite important as a Brazilian curator to look to Latin America and kind of put us inside this greater context. So part of the exercise actually began in thinking, what is Latin America? Is it a geography, or is it an ethnicity? And it's quite a big discussion, and I thank Gerardo for shedding some light on this. So for instance, we can consider the United States of America as part of Latin America, since it's the second country that most speak Spanish in the world, or maybe California, which has a special attachment to the this extended view of Latin America. So I think this is something important on the curatorial exercise, and we obviously undertook the most open-ended and extended view of what Latin America is. So there are artists from South America, the Caribbean, Central America, and there are artists that doesn't necessarily live in the Latin American region, but have parents that comes from there, and trying to add in many different ways to this melting pot of different views and different selves. So that was very important for the curatorial exercise. And also there's something very important to mention, but this book was basically all of it was done during the pandemic and during the lockdown. So there was a series of site visit trips that we were supposed to do. We were supposed to visit Buenos Aires, Colombia, and many other countries to do research there and actually meet the artists, because there are several artists that we have never met in person. But the pandemic came, so we really had to rethink this model, this working model. And so the way this came down was, in a sense, diluting the curatorial power, which is something that as a methodology really interests me, which is, talking to our peers and our colleagues and curators and gallerists too, and other artists, and anyways, our network in the Latin American art scene, and hearing from them who would be the artists that could fit the profile of this book. And so this was very interesting as an exercise, and I learned a lot. And then I acted more as this meta curator, because we wanted to be sure that we would have the most diverse and plural selection of artists. And it's important to say, for every artist that's in the book, there are 10 others that could be here this kind of book could be an ongoing series forever, because you always have new artists. And actually, Gerardo gave a good idea in his text, which would be to do a book about Latin American artists, which are not receiving an international attention, because the kind of thread that draws the artists in this book together is that they are in the imminence of receiving international attention. They're starting to doing exhibitions in other places beyond Latin America, and they're starting to be represented by galleries that are also not Latin American. So they're like participating in this international stage without exoticism, without selling the local, which actually doing this art that Gerardo just gave us the mindset of this art from here, but that does not represent this here, but it just is there, incorporated over there. And this actually takes to the idea of mondialité, which you were talking about, which I also think it goes in the same direction of what Gerardo was saying just before. So mondialité is a term that I use in my text, the preface to the book. It is lent from this philosopher and theoretician, Edouard Glissant, who's from French Haitian. And he does this call for mondialité, which is an idea that actually inspires me a lot. And the way I see this idea is that, first of all, it's an idea that acts against globalization, against mondialisation, and his call is for mondialité. And what's the problem of globalization? So why do we need to go against it? Is this idea that the common sense of globalization is making the world a smaller place with telecommunications and transport technology, which is great. I mean, we're here doing this webinar with people from all over the world because of this. At the same time, the problem with globalization, it's the homogenization that it undertakes in the world. You know, you can travel to another place, you know, to the other side of the world, and you'll go inside the supermarket and you can identify the products because they're the same that's on the supermarket here in São Paulo, because it's this huge companies that does like products that are sold worldwide. And so it's a fake globalization, what we have, because it's a globalization that works for capital and not necessarily for people and culture. You know, it's a globalization that can support more walls instead of less, which is my stance. You know, I'd rather have a world with less walls than more. And so in the art system, what this globalization would do is act like a bulldozer of cultures and kind of like narrowing and making all of the cultures shallower to prevail the dominant Eurocentric culture. So that's the problem with globalization. And the call of mondialité is a nuanced version of this globalization. It is one which doesn't want to pass over like a bulldozer of other cultures and try to do this big single culture worldwide, which not only is impossible, but it's something that I don't think we should wish for, because I think what's interesting about the world is people and different cultures and different societies. That's why we like to travel so much, for instance. And so mondialité is this idea that we should connect with each other and we should be global, but it should be a globalization that welcomes difference, that welcomes a different identity. You know, it's not about the Eurocentric authority, but it's actually about cherishing the other in their consciousness. So it's a different, it's a call for a different consciousness of what globalization should mean. And Gerardo, I'm interested to know if you have any comments about this.
Yes, sure. You know, this idea of mondialité of glissant is related to another idea he had, which is that of the right to opacity. So, as usually we look for transparency. Transparency guarantees communication and understanding. But Glissant, in a very subtle way, he stands for the opposite, which is opacity. But what was he was really trying to underline with this is the right to difference, even if a full communication is not possible. And I think that this is a very important idea. So even if we can't communicate 100 with a 100% understanding of each other, no problem. Let's keep this dialogue, you know, among opacity, which this also relates to another idea, which is that of the third space. So it's the ideas about mestizaje, hybridization, etc. They always, you know, think about the miscegenation and then the creation of a tertium quid as a result of the melange. But this other idea of a third space is a space where this mix is not possible. And then this space of opacity will be at the same time a space from which creation and poetry will arise. So it's a very provocative and interesting idea by Glissant. But I think that actually what really happened is it has given I mean, have made Glissant uh, has confirmed Glissant's ideas. Because if you travel around the world, you will see that this homogenization, this McDonaldization, even if it's present through, as you described, the transnational products that are in every supermarket everywhere. But at the same time, you will see that, you know, people have agency. Different people, they have different cultural agencies. And you will find that too. So if you go to India and you go to a McDonald's, you will see that the McDonald's, apart from burgers, is also selling Indian food because it's impossible. I mean, in India, you can just eat a burger. That's like very primitive. That's I mean, they don't like that. They like different sauces, and you know they like different flavors. So they are forced to also sell that there, and you find this all over the world. So I think that this is a challenge that is at stake for contemporary culture when we think about culture in global terms, which is this pulse, you know, this challenge between a current of homogenization and another one of context of the agency of different contexts and of cultural difference. So you find this, and I mean it's a struggle, but I think that I am very optimistic because well, before the confinement I used to travel a lot, and what you see all around is this prevailing agency from difference.
So, as you were speaking about India, my next question uh, goes on this direction. I would like to expand a bit the discussion go a bit beyond Latin America to the southern hemisphere and its puzzle. Like geographically, they lack, like the South Hemisphere lacks of horizontal integration and communication in contrast to its vertical and secondary connection with the North. In Latin America, it stands out even more because of cultural, geographic, and historic proximity. All countries in the South, they face problems deriving from post-colonialism. And instead of undertaking projects together, confronting this hegemony and integration, we notice that they tend to isolate themselves with little dialogue. So I would like you, Gerardo, to explore a bit more this thought of the South collaborating and acting together.
That's a need. I think that's a very urgent need. And this also something that is missing very much, because that's a colonial heritage. So our countries are, divided, and there's this lack of horizontal south communication among us. When I was traveling in Africa, sometimes the best way to go from one country to a neighboring country was to fly via Europe, because there were no connections, or there was a flight once every 15 days. I'm talking about neighboring countries. And when you experience that, you become very aware of how the colonial structure is still very much in place. Or apart from globalization and all these internationalizing processes that we are living today, the colonial structure is still very much in place. And as a result of that, we tend to even receive knowledge about ourselves via Europe. If you want to research about Africa, go to Paris, to the African Institute in Paris, and then you will have all the means there to study Africa. And this is a very serious, a very critical situation that we should try to overcome. Because if we create these horizontal circuits, if we create institutions that able to establish south to south exchange, then we will be building our own epistemes. We will be building our own values. We will be, discussing from our own agendas, and not taking like these loans, from a power structure that goes south north and north south. We talk today about the global south, but to me this is a very difficult, it's a problematic term, because how global is actually the south? It's true that now there are all international communications, international art and cultural circulation has expanded quite a lot. We know all that, but at the end, I mean, is the North, the hegemonic centers that still keep the power to legitimate, to judge, and to build knowledge, because an uneven distribution of that power. So we don't talk about a global north, because the north is global by default. So we need to say, well, the global south. So I think this is another very important challenge that we have. And, you know, a book like the one that you have put together is a contribution in that way. The book is trilingual. It has very good translations. It's Portuguese, Spanish, and English. And it's also, how I would say, it's also a contribution from Brazil to tell Latin America, like to say, to tell to the rest of the continent, well, see, we here in Brazil, that we are in a certain way disconnected from Latin America for linguistic and historical reasons, but we have put this, we are doing this effort, you know, to promote and to show and to discuss Latin American art. Because this is also something very interesting regarding this lack of south to south connections. I always feel ashamed when I go to Brazil, because in Brazil, many people speak Spanish or do an effort to speak in Spanish. We in Latin America, we are interested in, first it was to speak French and now English. But what about Portuguese? Very few Latin Americans, even very, you know, top scholars, they don't, they can not even read Portuguese, even if it's easier for Spanish speakers to do so. But this is telling about these fragmentations, these historical fragmentations that we need to overcome.
Yes, I mean, you have dedicated most of your research to overcome this totalizing and reducing notion, not of not only of art created in Latin America, but the continent itself. So something that you propose in your research is to modify the role of the artist in the periphery, moving from the one that imitates the dominant to access the universal, to one that produces universal content locally, offering a distinctive methodology and the new paradigm of art from here, or arte desde aquí. Can you explain better what arte desde aquí means? Coincidentally, Fernando and I were very pleased to have you on board, because our vision when we first started doing the book, the one was exactly arte desde aquí. So there was, like, it really converged in terms of perceptions.
Yes, sure. Well, you know, desde aquí, from here, you know, the old paradigm of Brazilian anthropophagy, which was, you know, this metaphor to talk about the cultural strategies of transculturation, appropriation, and syncretism. So to eat the opponent, you know, and to take, transform its force for your own benefit. You know? Well, these strategies are, to my view, are increasingly being replaced by a new perspective that's what we could call the paradigm of the from here, desde aquí. So what does that mean? Rather than appropriating and critically refunctionalizing the imposed international culture, transforming it in our own behalf, now the artists are actively making, and I underline making, that metaculture firsthand, unfettered from their own imageries and perspectives. They are doing so without manifestos or conscious agendas, just by creating fresh work, introducing new issues and meanings, coming out of their diverse experiences, uh, uh, and, and by infiltrating, it's a viral infiltration, in broader, somewhat more truly globalized circuits. So this is a epistemological transformation at the heart of the artistic discourses, which consist in changing from an operation of creative incorporation to another of direct international construction from a variety of subjects, experiences, and cultures. So, and in this, Brazil, the Brazilian art has been paradigmatic. Uh, I think that if I see an installation that I would be able to identify a Brazilian installation work, even if it has no label, because the Brazilians have introduced a new approach, a different approach to this to installation art as a result of a different feeling of the material, of a certain subjective proximity to the material, or the way in which an installation is conceived and constructed. So you won't see candomblé, you won't see the samba in that installation. The installation is not representing an identity. The installation is expressing an identity. So in here, the identity difference is expressed not in the way, not by representing a context, but by the way in which a text is built. This has to do with Wole Soyinka's idea of tigritude. In the 1960s, there were these discussions in Africa between a group of intellectuals led by Aimé Césaire, the Martiniquois poet, and which he proclaimed negritude as a way of constructing a black paradigm to confront the imposition of French culture on French colonies in the Caribbean and in Western Africa. So there was the proclamation of a black difference. So to that position, Wole Soyinka, Soyinka was a Yoruba, writer and playwright and essayist from Nigeria. And well, he was the first black person to get the Nobel Prize in Literature. It's a fantastic, very sophisticated, complex writer. But well, Soyinka told the following. He said, "A tiger has not to go around saying, I'm a tiger. When you go to the jungle and you see the corpse of a gazelle there, you will be aware that there the tiger expressed its tigritude. So tigritude versus negritude. So on the one, negritude as a construction of a difference and tigritude as the expression of an acting difference. I, I think that what happened as a result of the processes of internationalization of art and culture, it was tigritude that prevailed. And this was the way in which the very complex interactions and processes of cultures, to respond to this new situation, the way in which they finally find a way, to keep a difference in this homogenization to which we refer first, was precisely this way of having an acting agency in the way in which we construct culture.
Interesting. There's actually a question from the audience here, which I think it's a great timing for us to make for you, Gerardo. Considering what you just said, what do you think is the biggest change we'll experience in Latin American art or culture on this decade? And what do you think we can do as individuals to help this happen?
Well, it's difficult to predict because, usually, art is such a complex expression that is very difficult to predict. And now also we are living these enigmatic times where nothing is given for granted. So, but I would say that my view, these processes that I have very roughly outlined, I think that will continue to prevail. If we look at to the book that you put together, you will see there that there's no more that identity cult or cult to identity. Uh, what you will see is an emphasis on diversity. Subjectivities are, I would say, are more important in the configuration of Latin American art nowadays than they used to be, because before there was more, the art tended quite a lot to look to the social and to cultural issues, but now it's more introspective. You notice that by browsing the book. And also you see how such a diverse continent as Latin America, such a complex continent, has now is being more, how to say, is easier. Is you find more expressions of the continent uh, differences. For instance, to make it clear, because there's a Yanomami artist included in the book, and I like that a lot. This artist is yeah, I mean, he's not an urbanized person who left behind his culture of origin. He's a Yanomami, and he's using contents and forms taken from his culture, but he's creating with them uh, art to circulate. I mean, not an art that will satisfy religious or magic agendas in his community, but to circulate internationally. And I think that he even won an award in an art fair here in Madrid, in Arco, I think. And because what he does, he takes that those assets from his own culture, but he creates something anew in which his own subjectivities projected, creating a novel, new things, and not copying and repeating the traditional expressions. So, and that was a criticism that was made to Le Magicien de la Terre, the famous exhibition back in 1989. That Magicien put together traditional art expressions from indigenous people from different countries together with contemporary art. But the problem is that to me, it was in a way like putting together bananas and apples. Uh, uh, and now what you see is this.
Mm-hmm.
So an artist like, I can't remember his name because it's very difficult to remember, but he is what is creating something different that this might be a process that we will find in Latin America in the next decade. If you go to Guatemala, you will see also something related, although different, to these Yanomami artists. You will see many Mayan-speaking artists who receive a professional art training, but they keep living in their communities and they keep creating an art that that we could classify as contemporary art. It's a post-conceptual art, performatic, etc. But they are doing that using their own culture and personal experience living in their communities. So they receive a professional training and they have this base on their own culture, and they are all, again, putting both together and creating this fascinating art, and which is an art that it can be understood internationally because it's using a sort of an international art language that has been established hegemonically. That's true, but at the same time, it's being transformed, it's being broken by a plurality of new speakers that come forward and use the language, but at the same time transform it from within, introjecting their own differences, inside that language. So they have communication on the one hand, and they have opacity on the other hand. They have mondiality.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and the example you gave of Shironawe, I think speaks to all of these concepts we're developing here on this talk. But we're slightly running out of time, so I wanted to move to the next subject, which is when I'm very curious to know your opinion, which is for those of you who have not read the book yet, it's launching this week. Gerardo's text has a series of emojicons. And when you sent me this text, I was actually delighted to see the emojicons. And you said it was, I believe you wrote, you're experimenting with language in the image era. This was maybe 6 to 8 months ago. I would like to know how your experiments are being undertaken, and if you could please develop on this idea of the new image era, and how does this connect to language, and maybe what you're interested in writing from here onwards.
Well, let's try. I don't know for the. I don't know if you see here. Can you see them?
Yes, it's Marta Traba.
Yeah. It's a it's an avatar of Marta Trava that okay, yeah. So, you know, I came with this idea of, as I was writing the text, I say, well, what Trava would think about what I'm saying, about, you know, I'm talking about the hair, and, you know, and I respect her a lot. So I thought, well, why not have her like a phantasmatic presence there, you know, doing some comments on what I was writing by emoticons. Uh, and so I asked my assistant to make these emoticons of Marta Trava, and then, well, I placed them there as a sort of dialogue, you know. So she gets angry with me, she gets angry with Fernando, with João, with everything. So that at the same time, sometimes I make her think, and you know, and this is you know, it was fun, and it was like a way to play, and a way to pay homage to Marta Trava, who was well, we are here because of Marta Trava, who invented Latin American art. So she invented the business for us. And but at the same time, you know, it's also a way to reflect on how, you know, the Gutenberg era is over. That doesn't mean that the book is over, no, at all, because the book is something different, and it has its own space and its own character. But we are increasingly communicating through images. You know, you are in a restaurant, you are having a nice dinner, and you take a photo, and you send it by WhatsApp to your girlfriend. And oh, instead of describing what you were eating, you just take the photograph. So we talk about post photography nowadays. So photography is also over. Now it's photography through the internet, post photography. So I thought, well, you know, why not try to introduce something of that in a traditional book essay like the one I was writing, and try to introduce it, because I think that this is going to happen more and more, that we won't continue just to write using language, but we will, you know, introduce also photographs or images or emoticons, like in this case. And so I tried to, you know, to play with the idea, and I was a little bit concerned that you guys, the editors, will
No,
reject
not
that
at all.
and say, well, this is all. And so I was very pleased that you liked this idea.
Yeah, and I actually think my personal definition of what art is has a lot to do with what you just said. So art as a language, as a means of communication, which goes beyond letters and words and grammar. And for me, it is exactly there where you can find the power of art. And so maybe this image era can also be the redemption of contemporary art that maybe for the past 20 to 30 years was really marginalized. But these are steps to be seen. And the floor is yours, João, for the next question.
Yes. Gerardo, I think it's a very interesting time for you to be working in China. Gerardo is one of the curators of the Guangzhou Image Triennial that is taking place this year, starting in March, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Pardon me?
The Guangzhou Triennial, if I'm not mistaken.
The Guangzhou Image Triennial.
Exactly. So the theme of the triennial this year is rethinking collectivity, and I think it couldn't be more appropriate after COVID, what we have been living. So I wanted to hear more from you on your curatorial practices in this project and perceptions of working in China right now, and well, if it's possible to establish any parallel between China and Latin America somehow.
Well, I have worked in China quite several times, in Beijing, Shanghai, and in other cities. And but I always work with private institutions. And now, for the first time, I'm working with the Guangzhou Image Triennial, which is organized by the Guangdong Museum of Art. And this is a state museum. And well, I am experiencing a big difference. As I was not aware how under control are still state institutions in China. So the museum has little room to take its own decisions. Everything is submitted to the authorities, to the so-called higher authorities for approval. So this made the work a little difficult because we had some issues of censorship that I have been struggling with, and trying to resolve them. I would say that the museum is trying to do its best, but it is the bureaucratic structure in which it is inserted that makes it difficult for them to take to proceed the way in which they would like to proceed. So this is what it's been a difficult experience in this sense, and it's interesting because Guangzhou is Canton. I don't know if Portuguese. The Portuguese sailors were the ones who named the city that way, Canton, and now it has been changed to Guangzhou. The Chinese names were internationalized. And so this city, it has 15 million inhabitants. So Sao Paulo is like a village almost, vis-a-vis Guangzhou. And it's the port from which most of Chinese immigrants went around the world, and who were Cantonese Chinese. So it's a place that has been very international for hundreds of years, and so the intellectual ground is communication. People are professional, they are sophisticated people, but well, we are having these problems with the authoritarian structure in place there, because it's an official institution. It's a state-run and funded institution. The good side of it is that we don't have to fundraise. The museum and the triennial are fully funded by the government. But who pays command authoritarian and very strict way to proceed. I know that Cuauhtémoc Medina, my Mexican colleague, who curated the last Shanghai biennial, he also had a lot of censorship problems. And one of the artists included in the book, Reiner Leiva Novo, who's a Cuban artist in the Shanghai biennial, and his work was censored. And so in the negotiation with he came with the fantastic solution, a Solomonic solution, performatic, on which his work was going to be displayed, to leave it empty, and then to paint it all over and over, once again. So it was a permanent performance taking place in the space where himself, for the time he stayed there, kept painting and repainting the wall. And when he left, the museum hired some other persons to paint and paint again the wall. So it was a critique, it was a denunciation of censorship, and at the same time, it was like something that the censors couldn't repress, because it was just a white, a very nice solution. I might have to paint my walls too in the triennial, because we are just negotiating right now some censorship issues. So, I mean, we don't have this in Latin America. I mean, there's censorship and there are authoritarian institutions, but not to that extreme. So that's the difference that in this case, I found, to answer your question, referring to Latin America. But I want to also repeat and emphasize that in my previous experiences in China, I didn't suffer this type of problems.
Sorry. I was muted, sorry. Well, Gerardo, it was a pleasure to talk to you, a pleasure to work with you, to discover many things with you. Thank you so much for being able to be with us today. Thank you, Fernando. And thank you all for attending our panel. We hope you liked. We will share with you the link to get the book, and we remain available if you have any doubts, concerns, comments. Get in touch with us. Fernando will share our emails as well. Thank you all.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, and thank you very much to the audience too.
Yes, thank you all. Just remembering, I have just posted the link to buy the book for those who are interested. If you have any problem with Amazon, we just put up the store there. You can also send me an email here to the address I'm posting on the chat. We will have this conversation in our social media, I guess in the following 2 weeks, because we will have it subtitled in Portuguese. Once more, thank you, João and Gerardo, for this time, and thank you everyone that's here in this room as attendees for sharing their time with us and for building another block on this idea of a more integrated Latin America. Thank you all.
Thank you.